Get in the coat closet. Right now. Not a sound. I stared at her. Nora, 70 years old, barely up to my shoulder, had both hands locked around my wrist and was hauling me backward down the hallway with a grip I could not break. I actually tried to pull away. My pearl earrings were on. My coat was buttoned. The car service was 40 minutes out. I was dressed for my daughter Isabel's MBA graduation, the day I'd been counting down to for 3 years. And this woman, who had worked quietly in my home for 19 years, who I had never once seen move faster than a steady walk, was dragging me down the hall like I weighed nothing. Nora. No, I found something. You need to hear this for yourself. If I just tell you, you won't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me, either. One word. But the look in her eyes when she said it stopped me completely. Not fear, exactly. Something harder than fear. Something that had been sitting in her chest for a long time, waiting for the right moment to come out. I stopped pulling. You'll be able to hear everything. Don't come out until I come for you, no matter what you hear, Nora said. The closet door swung open. She put one flat palm against my back and pushed. I went in. The door clicked shut before I could turn around. Dark. My heart was going too fast. Through the gap, at the bottom of the door, a thin strip of light. Then footsteps, 2 sets. Before they even reached the hallway, I noticed something. Marcus, my daughter's fiancé, came through the front entrance first. He moved past Nora, who was standing just inside the doorway, the way she always did without a glance. No nod, no acknowledgement. Not even a slight shift in his stride. To him, she simply wasn't there. Part of the wallpaper, part of the floor. I filed that away without knowing why. Then the voices started. Marcus spoke first. Low, even, unhurried. The voice of a man who had already run this conversation in his head and found it satisfactory. She thinks I've already left. We have about an hour. I pressed my back against the wall of the closet and went completely still. Isabel spoke next. And I want to be clear about what I heard, because I have listened to my daughter's voice for 36 years. I know the sound of her when she's happy, when she's worried, when she's trying not to cry. What came through that door was none of those things. It was flat, practiced, like she was reading from a script she'd committed to memory. They talked about the trust document, the filing cabinet in Leonard's old study. Top drawer, unlocked. And then Marcus said something that drained every bit of warmth from my body. He said the amendment couldn't be in place before the wedding. Not what amendment, not what are you talking about. He knew exactly what it was. My name is Vivian, 63 years old, widow. Leonard and I built an architectural firm together, starting from a rented 2-room office in the annex, back when we had more ambition than furniture, 31 years. The trust we set up wasn't elaborate. It was simply us, making sure that what we'd built together went to our children the way we intended to, Isabel, and to our son Daniel out in Vancouver. When my lawyer Helen suggested adding an amendment after Isabel got engaged, I agreed without hesitation. The amendment classified the inherited assets as excluded property under Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act, standard protection. What it meant in plain language was this: whatever Leonard and I built together stays exactly that ours. It doesn't get absorbed into someone else's marriage. Marcus knew about it, not vaguely, precisely. Every dollar in that trust is a decision Leonard and I made together. A project we finished past midnight. A client we drove 2 hours through sleet to meet. A year we skipped a vacation because the timing wasn't right. That trust isn't money. It's 31 years of us, folded into paperwork. My fingers found the sleeve of Leonard's coat. He'd been gone 4 years. Standing in that dark listening to this, I knew exactly what he would have done. He would have walked out of that closet and said the hard thing in a loud voice, because that was Leonard. He was always louder than me. I process things quietly, decide privately, and emerge on the other side already moving. So I stood there, and I counted. 23 minutes. Then Marcus's car pulled out of the driveway. The engine faded down the street. Silence settled back over the house. The closet door opened. Nora stood in the frame and looked at me. No question, no words, just one long, steady look that held every question at once and waited for a single answer. I shook my head, very slightly. She reached up without a word and straightened my pearl earring. It had shifted in the dark. Then she held out my coat. Neither of us said anything about the graduation ceremony. We both already knew. The decoy coffee was still on the table. Nora had brewed it to pull Marcus away from the hallway to get him talking about something harmless long enough for whatever came next. Now it sat between us, stone cold, and neither of us touched it. She folded her hands in front of her and started from the beginning. That's how Nora does everything. From the beginning, in order, without skipping. March 1st. Marcus was in the front sitting room, door half open, phone pressed to his ear. Nora was walking past on her way to the linen closet. She wasn't listening. She was simply there. And she caught a thread before his voice dropped. Ontario legislation. If we're inside the marriage, when distributions happen, then nothing. She kept walking. But she held on to those words the way you hold on to something when you don't yet know what it's worth. April. She took a phone message for Isabel Marcus calling, asking her to call back. Routine. Nora wrote it down on the notepad by the kitchen phone and pressed the pen harder than she needed to. When she tore the top sheet away, the one underneath still held the impression. She stood there and read it. Harrington and Associates. She looked them up that same afternoon. Estate litigation specialists. Offices in Toronto and Calgary. She folded the impression sheet and put it in her coat pocket and said absolutely nothing to anyone. Then she paused. She told me about a Sunday dinner back in April. Marcus and Isabel had come over. We were all at the table, and I mentioned completely naturally, the way you mention anything to your own child, that I was having Helen make some updates to the trust structure. Something about making sure both children were properly protected if either of them married. I wasn't hiding it. It was a mother telling her daughter she was looked after. Isabel nodded. Marcus reached over and poured himself more wine. Nora was clearing plates. She watched his face when I said it. No surprise. No follow-up question. Just a half second where everything behind his eyes went very still, and then the smile came back, smooth as before, like a door closing. That's when I started writing dates in the notebook, Nora told me. Not because I was certain. Because I didn't like the way he didn't ask. He'd heard something important and decided not to react. That's not how innocent people listen. May. The public library on St. Clair Avenue. Civil court records, not divorce files, but the public record of a property dispute. A woman's family had filed a claim after a protracted estate litigation swallowed up most of what she'd been entitled to receive. The case had dragged on for years. The legal fees had done what the courts wouldn't. Defendant, Marcus Caldwell. Representing firm, Harrington and Associates. Plaintiff, Diana Okafor. Same name, same firm, different woman. He had done this before. Earlier that February, Isabel sat across from me at this same kitchen table with that gentle voice she uses when she's delivering something she's been coached to say. Marcus thinks you've always needed to be in control of things. I know you don't mean it that way, Mom. I then allowed the answer whole, smiled and changed the subject. He had been building that wall since November. One careful sentence at a time. One dinner. One quiet comment. One slightly reframed story about who I was and what I wanted. And I sat there, polite, and let him build it brick by brick. They didn't know that the whole time, Nora was watching. She reached into her coat pocket and set a small notebook on the table. Dates down the left margin. Times. What she'd heard. What she'd seen. What she'd noticed. Every entry written in her own hand since the first week of spring. I looked at the hand that placed it there. It has a slight tremor. A car accident at 58 left her with that. She always holds her coffee cup with her right hand, so it doesn't show. That same hand had been keeping this record for me since March. That's when I understood what 19 years actually means. Helen moved fast. By Tuesday morning, it was done. The trust amendment was signed, notarized, and in effect under Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act. The inherited assets, the house, the investments, the commercial property in Oakville that Leonard bought in 2003 were now formally classified as excluded property, protected from any matrimonial claim. Whatever Leonard and I built together could not be touched by someone else's marriage license. I won't walk you through the paperwork. What matters is the result. Done. The following Saturday, Isabel came for lunch. She brought yellow tulips, the kind she knew I preferred. She hugged me at the door and smelled like the same shampoo she'd used since university. I held on for a moment, then stepped back and let her in. She talked about the wedding for 20 minutes. The venue was confirmed. The dress had been altered. She was debating between peonies and garden roses for the centerpieces because roses felt too expected. I listened to all of it. I let her be happy, or let her perform happiness, or let the space exist where I could no longer tell the difference. Then I set the folder on the table and opened it to the first page. I pointed to a name. Diana. Her name was Diana Okafor. She was somebody's daughter too. Isabel went still. Not dramatically, just the way a person goes still when something lands. The stillness I'd known since she was small. Not a wall going up, but something actually being received. I let it sit there between us. Before she left, I said only one thing more. I'm not asking you to decide anything today. I just need you to know. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. Isabel, but the voice on the line wasn't hers. Every sentence had someone else's shape to it. I need space. You've always made everything about you. You've never been able to let go. I recognized each line. Every one of them. They were Marcus's sentences, delivered in my daughter's voice, and the distance between those two things was the saddest thing I'd heard in years. I hear you, I said. I love you. Call me when you're ready. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I let myself cry. Not because the legal ground had shifted, that ground was solid. I cried because Marcus had abandoned that front entirely. He'd moved to the one thing I couldn't file paperwork to protect. The one place I had no legal remedy. The place where my daughter lived. Around the same time, Helen mentioned something she'd found during her review. There was a prenuptial agreement. Marcus had drawn it up. Isabel had signed it without reading carefully, because he'd described it as standard protection for both of them. It had no effect on my trust. The trust belonged to me, not Isabel. But Helen set it on the desk and looked at me over the top of her glasses. He always builds 2 doors, she said. The man never entered a room with only one exit. 4 days after that, Nora received a registered letter. Marcus had filed a civil claim against her, defamation and tortious interference. The language was cold and precise, alleging that Nora had fabricated and communicated false and damaging representations regarding the character and intentions of Mr. Marcus Caldwell to her employer, directly causing harm to his personal relationship and betrothal. It was a real cause of action under Ontario law. It was entirely without merit. But it had his signature on it, and it had Nora's name on it, and a 70-year-old woman who had never been sued a day in her life was now holding a legal document in her kitchen. That was the point. Not the courtroom, the fear. Nora brought the letter to me that evening. Her hands were steady. Her voice, for the first time since I'd known her, was not. I read every word, set it down on the table, picked up my phone. Helen answered on the second ring. Helen's response went out within 10 days. Not from a courtroom, not from a judge, just a letter, 1 paragraph, from Helen's office to Marcus's counsel at Harrington and Associates. It said this: defamation requires a false statement communicated to a third party. Nora made no statements to any third party. She reported her direct observations to her employer, a communication protected under the employment relationship. There was no publication, no demonstrable falsity, no cognizable damage. The claim could not proceed. Helen attached the Diana Okafor court records as an appendix, not as a threat, as context, so that Harrington and Associates would understand exactly what was already sitting in a file with Helen's name on it. Marcus withdrew the claim. No announcement, no phone call. He simply instructed his counsel to stand down, and the letter arrived, confirming it was over. I expected to feel something when I heard. The table was quiet. The kitchen smelled like coffee. Outside, the street was doing whatever streets do in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and the only thing I could register was that Isabel still hadn't called. Winning that particular round meant nothing if the wall was still standing. Then came the evening of the withdrawal notice. Marcus received the confirmation email from Harrington, the one saying the claim had been dropped, that there was no path forward, that it was finished. He was in the living room of the apartment he shared with Isabel. And for the first time in 14 months of careful, measured, deliberate behavior, he let his composure slip. He called his lawyer immediately, standing, voice sharper than Isabel had ever heard it. He felt safe in his own home, and he was angry, and those two things together made him careless. Isabel heard him from the bedroom. She came to the doorway. He saw her and pivoted toward the kitchen to finish the call, and he did not lock his laptop screen. He thought he'd be back in 2 minutes. He had been meticulous for 14 months. He was not meticulous tonight. Isabel walked to the table. She set a glass of water down next to the laptop. The screen was still active. The inbox was open. The most recent email sat at the top of the list, bold and unread. Harassment. Claim. Nora Reeves. Withdrawn. She didn't click it. She didn't need to. She stood at that table and read the subject line twice. The man who had walked past Nora without a glance, who had moved through our home for 19 months and never once registered that she existed, had put her name into a legal document to frighten her into silence, and then left the proof of it glowing on a table while he went to argue in the kitchen. Isabel would tell me about that moment later, in pieces, over several Sunday evenings. She'd describe it this way. I didn't think about you first, Mom. I thought about Nora. And then I thought, if he could do that to her, what did he actually do to Diana? And what was he going to do to me? The filter dropped, not because of anything I said, not because of the folder I'd placed on the table at Saturday's lunch, because Marcus had aimed at the wrong person, and Isabel saw his aim clearly for the very first time. That night, my phone rang. Isabel. No explanation, no long opening, just her voice, her actual voice, the one I'd known her whole life, saying 4 words. Can I come for dinner? Yes, I said. I put the phone down, walked to the stove, and started the soup. 3 weeks after that dinner, Isabel called. The wedding was postponed, not cancelled, postponed. She said it in one short sentence and left space after it, and I didn't fill that space with questions. She wasn't ready to give more, and I wasn't going to ask for it. Okay, I said. I love you. I love you too. That was enough. For now, that was everything. The following Sunday, she came for dinner. No Marcus. She stood at the front door with a bottle of Ontario Riesling from a vineyard near Niagara, the same region where the two of us had taken a trip together when she was 17. We'd spent a weekend driving back roads between vineyards, arguing about which one had the better view, eating cheese off paper plates at a picnic table in September wind. She may not have remembered. She may have chosen it by coincidence. Either way, I took the bottle from her hands and went to find the opener. We sat at the kitchen table and talked for 3 hours. About Leonard, the way we're sometimes able to now, without the rawness, just the memory sitting with us like a welcome guest. About Daniel's daughters in Vancouver, who had just started skating lessons and apparently fell down with great enthusiasm and got right back up. About a novel we'd both read and disagreed about in exactly the comfortable way that means both of you actually read it. Marcus wasn't mentioned once. Some walls don't need to be torn down brick by brick. Sometimes you just agree, quietly, to stop building. At the end of the night, she put her coat on in the hallway, the same hardwood floors, the same strip of light from the porch. She had one hand on the door, and then she stopped and turned around. I stopped in March, Mom. I want you to know that. She held my gaze while she said it. When she'd started to see what Marcus was doing, the slow, careful erosion of everything she thought she knew about me, she had stopped feeding it, stopped reporting back, stopped being useful to him, even while she was still standing next to him. She hadn't come to me. That was the part that sat differently from everything else. But she had stopped. I pulled her into a hug in the doorway. This time, she was the one who held on longer. Around that same period, Helen and I had one last review session. As she was closing the file, she mentioned something from the Calgary records, almost as an aside. Diana Okafor eventually filed a counterclaim, Helen said. The records show she recovered a significant portion of what she was owed. It took 4 years and cost her considerably. She paused, but she didn't stop. The room was quiet for a moment. I'm glad, I said. I meant it completely. Helen also sent a professional notification to Harrington and Associates. 1 page, factual, no language designed to threaten. Just a clear account of what had occurred and what had been documented. What Marcus or his counsel did with that information was their own business. Within 2 months, Marcus left Toronto. Isabel heard through a mutual acquaintance. She mentioned it to me in passing. The way you mention weather, noted, acknowledged, moved on from. She didn't comment further, neither did I. A few days after Isabel's Sunday visit, Nora came back from a trip to see her sister. She walked through the back door with a white cardboard box from the bakery on Mount Pleasant. Butter tarts. She set them on the counter without announcement and put the kettle on. We sat at the kitchen table with our tea and didn't talk much. The silence was the right temperature, not heavy, not forced. Just 2 people who had been through something together and didn't need to keep explaining it to each other. After a while, I said it. He never once looked at you, not even when he walked right past you. Nora lifted her cup. I know, she said. That's why I could help you. You might think this story is about money, about a will, about a calculated man, and a mother smart enough to stop him. It isn't. This is a story about what happens when you stand in the dark, surrounded by the smell of someone you have already lost, and hear the voice of the person you love most, being used as a weapon against you. And you have to decide, in that darkness, who you are going to be when you walk back out. Let me tell you how it ended, specifically, because vague endings don't serve anyone. The Trust Amendment, signed and notarized under Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act, protected just over $2.4 million in combined assets. The Rosedale House, a portfolio of investments Leonard and I had built over 3 decades, and the Oakville commercial property he bought in 2003 that had appreciated considerably by the time any of this happened. Every dollar of it remained classified as excluded property, untouchable. Marcus never got within legal reach of a single cent. The defamation and tortious interference claim against Nora was withdrawn within 10 business days of Helen's response letter. No hearing, no judge. His own counsel advised him there was no viable path forward. Helen's formal notification to Harrington and Associates was 1 page. Professional. No dramatics. It simply ensured that the firm understood what had been documented and what would be available if anyone ever needed it. Marcus left Toronto within 2 months of the claim being dropped. He didn't announce it. He was simply gone. And Diana Okafor, the woman whose name I placed on a table in front of my daughter, the woman who had already lived through a version of this, recovered a significant portion of her losses after 4 years of fighting. It cost her considerably in legal fees and in years, but she got back up. I think about that more than I expected to. About 4 months after Marcus left, a voicemail appeared on my phone. His voice measured, reasonable, the same tone he used at dinner parties. He said he thought there had been a misunderstanding. He said he'd always cared about Isabel. He said he hoped we could speak. I listened to it once, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee going cold in my other hand. Then I deleted it. No reply, no explanation, no door left open. Some messages don't deserve a response, they deserve a silence, so complete that the person sending them finally understands it. My son Daniel calls every Sunday from Vancouver. He called the Sunday after Isabel's first dinner back, and I told him she'd been there. He was quiet for a moment. How was it? He asked. Good, I said. Really good. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for months. Knowing Daniel, he probably had. Isabel comes for dinner most Sundays now. We're finding our way back through small things, a shared book, a drive to look at fall colour on the bridle path, the occasional phone call on a Wednesday afternoon about nothing in particular. There's still territory between us that we haven't mapped yet. Things she hasn't said and things I haven't pressed for. That's all right. Bridges don't have to be built all at once. And Nora is still here. She makes coffee in the mornings and occasionally brings things from the Mount Pleasant bakery and says very little, which is exactly the right amount. Now let me tell you what I actually learned. Not the legal part. The part underneath it. The first thing. Manipulation doesn't look like a villain in a doorway. It looks like a man who pours wine at dinner and never asks the follow-up question. It works by borrowing the infrastructure of love, your trust, your history, your longing to believe the best about the people your children choose, and redirecting it. Isabel wasn't naive. She was in love, and she was being carefully managed. And those two things together made her available to something she would never have chosen with clear eyes. If you recognize that pattern somewhere in your own life, in a relationship, in a family, in a workplace, the question to sit with is not, how did I miss it? The question is, who has been writing the stories you believe about the people you love? And what do they gain if you keep believing them? The second thing, the most important person in this story is the one nobody looked at. Marcus walked past Nora for 19 months and never once registered that she existed. That single failure became the foundation of his defeat. Not because Nora was extraordinary, though she is, but because she was a person he had decided didn't count. And people who get dismissed tend to watch very carefully, because no one is performing for them. Every one of us has a Nora, the steadiest person in your life. The one who shows up without being asked, without keeping score, without ever making you feel like a burden. You probably underestimate them. Most of us do. I stood in a coat closet with my hand on a dead man's sleeve before I fully understood what 19 years of quiet, consistent loyalty actually looked like. Look at that person. Tell them. The third thing, justice, in real life, is quiet. There was no confrontation scene. No moment where Marcus stood across from me and heard everything I'd held back. No speech. No reckoning with an audience. I signed the paperwork that needed signing. I placed the truth on the table without raising my voice. And then I waited. And Marcus, through his own arrogance, his own impatience, his own certainty that the housekeeper didn't matter, did the rest himself. Real justice doesn't have a score beneath it. It looks like a woman at a kitchen table, drinking tea with the person who kept her record since March, knowing that what needed protecting has been protected. That's enough. That is, in fact, everything. One last thing, and then I'll let you go. Isabel knew enough to have asked me directly. She chose, for a while, not to ask. That sits in me differently from everything else in this story. Not like anger, more like grief. She is my daughter. I watched her take her first steps on the floor of that annex office, while Leonard held the measuring tape and pretended he wasn't watching her too. People can love you and still be turned, slowly and carefully, against you. Forgiveness isn't pretending that didn't happen. Forgiveness is the decision not to let a wound become the last word between two people who still have time left. We still have time. If there's someone in your life who has been quietly holding things together without ever asking you to notice, look at them today. You don't need to make a speech about it. Just look. And if this story touched something you've been carrying, something you haven't quite been able to name, leave a word below. Whatever it is, you don't have to stand in the dark alone.